salesman. He's worked in that area for a very long time and describes himself as a self-taught physicist. And so he's going to let us in on vortex implosion dynamics. Let's welcome David Garroway.
Right.
And everything else, and I said, prove it to them.
Uh-huh.
And, yeah, it's pretty neat.
Yeah, I mean, most people that go there think it is a real anomaly, a gravitational anomaly. I've sent people there, though, that have come back and said, no, it's a phony. Yet they invite you to bring your own instruments and do your own experiments there. And I have done so, and I'm convinced it's a real gravitational anomaly, which blew me away more than most people because I understood relativity and I knew Einstein's work. And according to Einstein, it was impossible. You can't have anti-gravity, you can't have anti-time. So you go there, and the first thing he does is there are two cement blocks, and he whips out a government level, says, you're welcome to bring your own, check this out. He puts it between the blocks, it says level. You stand on one block, I stand on the other block, and we're eye to eye. Then we trade places, and suddenly you shrink a foot, and I've grown a foot, and I'm looking over your head now. And this is in a space of less than, like, 18 inches. Then he leads you up a trail to this little shack at the center of the spot. As you go up the trail, you have to lean into this force coming out of the ground. And by the time you're at the center of the spot, you're leaning so far forward that if you look down, you can't see your own feet in front of you. You're looking, yeah, you can't see your own feet, you're leaning so far forward. And there's a weight at the spot inside the shack. You get on one side of the weight, you can push it up gently with one finger and it'll swing way up. You get on the other side and you push on it and you have to lean against it with all your weight to even budge it a few inches. That's pretty impressive. Other things, the main thing that one thing he did was he took a plank and it has a groove in it, and he took a ball and he put the level on the plank, says level, he let go of the ball, and the ball accelerated uphill, flew off the plank, and he had to catch it. But the one thing that clued me and my buddy Bill, who's been working on this theory for a long time with me, about the nature of space-time and gravity was the fact that the Coriolis effect is reversed at the spot. As you probably know, in the northern hemisphere, water goes down the drain in the right way, right clockwise direction. In the southern hemisphere, it's the other way, but at the spot, it goes down the drain in the other direction. And this really blew my mind. I thought, well, not only does this anti-gravity have a push effect, but also has torque associated with it. So I left the spot disillusioned and feeling I had been lied to by my teachers, determined to figure out the true nature of gravity and the way things worked. So after many years, we reasoned that there must be something called this ether, the lumiferious ether that the Greeks believed in, but was denied when Michelson and Morley came along. Back in 1933, I think, they tried to detect the ether, and because they couldn't detect it with their particular experiment, science then went on and assumed there is no ether. Well, I need to explain how they blew it, where they went wrong, and why ether can still exist even though their experiment doesn't work. They assumed the ether would be flowing in one particular direction in space. It's a very tenuous gas, they reasoned. In January, it would be flowing east. In July, it would be flowing west relative to the rotation of the Earth around the sun. What they did is they took a light and a photocell and a clock, and they measured the time it took the light to reach the photocell. They reasoned if the Earth was going one direction through the ether, the light would take more time because it had to swim uphill in the ether flow to get to the receptor. 6 months later, it would be out of phase, and it would take less time for the light to make its transit. Well, no matter how they oriented their machine, no matter what time of year it was, the time was always the same. So they figured, well, there can't be an ether. They blew it. They made a false assumption about the nature of the ether, and science has been on the wrong track ever since. The reason they couldn't find it is because the ether is actually a de-astrofractating implosion. First, we had to work out the way things really are in this universe. Einstein was right, the Big Bang happened, but it happened about twice as long ago as he states. Happened about probably 35 billion years ago. The universe did blow up, but there was no matter created. It was just basically hot air, swirling hot air that expanded, got to its maximum size about 16 billion years ago, where we see the background radiation and think the universe began at that point. Then it cooled and it started to implode. As it imploded, it started spiraling inwards in a left-handed direction relative to the inward direction of the universe. As it did so, hydrogen particles came into being. This backs up the constant creation theory of hydrogen. They do spontaneously appear out of nothing, quote unquote. Actually, what's happening is hydrogen precipitates out of the condensing ether as the ether cools and becomes more dense as we implode. Then the formation of stars occurred, elements, planets, and galaxies. And the oldest observable galaxies at the edge of the universe started to form. Then life began, and now as the universe continues to implode, the ether becomes more dense and more complicated. There are more ether waves happening, more functions are occurring in the ether. Complex life is beginning. Like I said, it's a de-astrofractation process, meaning the reason Michelson and Morley couldn't find it is because everything and everybody in this room has their own personal envelope of imploding ether around them. Gravity is an effect. It's not a force. You're being pushed down to the earth right now, not pulled. We're all shrinking a little bit all the time because this ether is pushing us in. As it pushes us in, it drives the electrons around in their orbit, and indeed is responsible for all the different forces of nature, which really aren't forces at all. They're effects of this ether. As it implodes, it breaks up into smaller and smaller venues. On the large scale, say around the Earth, there are actually 12 spirals. There's a dodecahedron of imploding ether around the Earth. And around any ball in this room or any object, there's 12 different spirals. Each side of this 12-sided sphere has 5 sides to that. So every vortex has 5 sides to it. And as it implodes, it breaks up into smaller vortexes and smaller vortexes. So the Earth has 12, but as they come down, the buildings each have their own. It's like a backwards bullet hole breaking up. Then the buildings and the trees and the people and the dogs, they all have their own vortex. Those vortexes break up into even smaller vortexes. And so every atom, every molecule has their vortexes around it, et cetera. It goes all the way down to the nuclear level. And I'll get to what happens at that stage in a minute. Gravity accelerates things according to the Fibonacci series. This is something that's been overlooked, I think. We see this spiral in nature all over the place. The seashells on the shore, the turning of a ram's horns, even the ratio of our fingers and our bones to each other obey the golden mean, or phi, which is generated by the Fibonacci series. So if I was to drop a ball, it would first fall 1 foot, then a little more than 1 foot, then 2 feet, then 3 feet, then 2 plus 3 is 5 feet, then 8 feet, then 13, then 21, then 34, then 55, then 89. This is already known, but what isn't known is that because the ether also rotates as it accelerates inward, things are spinning at the Fibonacci series too. So gravity not only accelerates inward, it spins stuff at the Fibonacci rate. This produces the golden mean spiral so that every second the length of the fall is 1.618 times longer than it was before, and the second before that, it's that minus 1, which is 0.618 times as long. And again, all the vortexes have 5 sides. This is very important to remember. This is one reason why they use pentagrams in magic, because they resonate with the ether flow. and provide energistic reactions. There are 4 basic spirals in the ether. The primary one, the first one in our universe, is left-handed in. Then the next one radiates out from the heart of all matter, just like Marco Rodin says, these are the etherons he refers to, as a right-handed out wave. This is the spiral that life is based on. All our DNA is right-handed. Right-handed energy is different than left-handed energy. We'll be getting into that. Then we have the right-handed in spiral. The right energy goes out, then it comes back in, and leaves this continuum, and then it comes back as left-handed out energy. So we have 4 spirals going on, but we have 3 sets of each of these 4 spirals. So as I speak in this room, there are 12 different ether waves going on. Actually, there are 13 if you count the synergistic wave, which is gravity itself. But we'll just talk about the 12 waves to begin with. The big thing that we discovered, which is important, is there's a difference between right-handed rotation and left-handed rotation. This is because the primary left-in wave, which carries gravity and is responsible for rotating atoms and whatnot, is fairly loose and sloppy and disorganized as it travels inward. Once it makes its transit and it comes back out of the nucleus of the atom, it radiates out as a right-handed out wave, which then has to swim uphill against the incoming left-handed in energy. And because it has to struggle to get out and up, it becomes hot and tight and experiences friction, and it becomes very smooth. So we now have 2 different types of energy resonating in the ether, right-handed and left-handed. And the right-handed energy is responsible for things like life, whereas the left-handed is responsible for things like chaos and disorder. This is what happens on the nuclear level inside of every atom. There is a reason they call it a nuclear reaction. I'm going to make a few puns during this presentation, and it's not to be cute, it's because I think this information has actually been known for thousands of years, but has been either forgotten or suppressed for whatever reason. At the nuclear level, these ether waves are imploding upon the proton. These 12 waves accelerate the proton in a rotational fashion, adding spin, adding another spin, another spin, another spin, constantly spinning it faster and faster. This brings the rotational velocity of the, the rotational velocity of the proton up to light speed. So any part of the proton would be seen to be moving faster than light from left to right after a little while. In order not to produce this paradox, our proton has to shrink and leave time space. So we actually did this simulation on a computer using standard CAD software. We did simulate it using the modeling that the northern hemisphere of an atom has a little more energy than the south, because right-handed waves associated with the northern hemisphere have more energy and therefore more mass than the southern hemisphere. But if you add these 12 waves to a proton, it will shrink, and it moves up the screen. It'll shrink, and it disappears from time-space. Then say this is a 1-minute cycle, it remains absent for half the cycle. There's nothing there in the nucleus of an atom for half the time it's supposed to be there. Nothing there except for a black hole. And it finally climbs back into this universe, takes an inward jog for some reason, then it comes around again and repeats the process. This is actually the nuclear process. This is what the ether waves do to the protons and nucleus of every atom. And as it comes back in, it's coming back from another continuum, which I'll get into in a second. It's screaming into this universe, expanding, radiating out right-handed energy. Then it picks up more left-handed energy and has to make its tour again. There are 4 universes involved in this. It's much like a heart pumping around blood. Our universe at the center here is the counterclockwise inward universe. This is us. We go in, the proton gets squeezed out of this continuum, it goes to another continuum. The right-handed out universe does its thing there, goes to the imploding clockwise universe, does its thing there, finally to the counterclockwise exploding, and then back into our universe. So it's sort of like a 4-stroke engine pumping around energy. 2 of the universes are expanding, 2 are contracting. But you have to have all 4 to make the show work. And they come in sets of tetrahedral combinations. There might be an unlimited number of universes, but we're just going to stick to this four for right now. Inertia is a constant implosive force that holds the atoms in place. They wouldn't have resistance to acceleration if there wasn't something resisting them. The acceleration of a particle compresses the ether in front of it, and there's a low pressure in back. It takes a second for the ether to rush in to even things out. And resistance occurs until the high pressure system in front can be dissipated. And then it's at rest again. Now, next we come to how do we overcome this etherical compression and generate anti-gravity? This is what Mr. Fala talked about yesterday. This is an inertial drive. It's actually a rotational to linear momentum converter. The way it works is you take a bicycle wheel, take the rim off, then you remove all but 6 spokes, and on those spokes you put lead weights that slide back and forth. The weights are attached to the center of rotation via a cable, and there's a solenoid at the center here. Then you turn on your motor and you set the whole system spinning. Now, as these weights flying around on the outside come to this point here, the solenoid turns on and yanks in the weights. The weights get pulled in and are tucked in very close to the center of orbit here. Then they're allowed to fall back out to their original position on this side of the system. So what you have here is a system where the weights on the outside on this half of the system want to fly away very badly. There's a lot of centrifugal pull going on. But the weights here don't want to fly away very much. They're kind of tucked in and happy where they are. So you have more centrifugal force on this side of the system than you do on this side of the system. The pulling in gets canceled out by the letting out of the weights, and you have an overall direction of acceleration. As the system accelerates, it's going to slow down, and you're going to have to pump more energy into it to keep it accelerating. But this would make a great motor to put in automobiles, spaceships, what have you. There's no transmission involved. Here's the three-dimensional version of what I just showed you. This involves a disk, and half the disk is weighted very heavily, and half the disk is very light. Now, this little spot is the center of gravity of the heavy side. So what you do is you run a rod through the disk, it's attached to a motor, and you start spinning that disk. Now that is inside of a larger wheel. Say this first rod here is the x-axis. This is inside of a larger wheel mounted on the, this rod is mounted on the y-axis, and this wheel here is mounted on the x-axis. This also spins. Finally, you have the largest wheel on the outside mounted on the z-axis, and that also is driven by a motor. So what you're doing is you're flinging this mass around on all 3 axes at this ratio, 1 to 1 to 1. And what happens is, put on your 3D glasses. This is showtime here. Excuse me, let me get some water. What happens is the center of mass of the heavy side is always flung out in one hemisphere of the rotation. It never makes it to the southern hemisphere. It's always being flung around, and it traces out a figure-8 pattern so that the centrifugal vectors produced are all occurring in one hemisphere, and they all add up to a one-directional acceleration. So the energy pumped into the acceleration of all 3 rings winds up combining and coalescing into one direction of acceleration. And again, this would be great in cars. It has no transmission, so you wouldn't have to waste energy getting the energy to the wheels. It's very much along the lines of flywheel technology, what they've been working on for a long time. You can change the direction of acceleration by changing the rotation of the mass. You don't need gears for that or anything. You just change the speed of the motors. And you can use it not only to accelerate, but once you're accelerated, you can turn the direction of the spin around and use it as a brake and recapture the energy you've already put into your vehicle's acceleration. And then at the stoplight, you can store it by turning off 2 of the motors and let the wheel just spin in one dimension, holding the energy until the light changes. Then you turn the other engines on, and off you go again. So we feel this has a great deal of potential. I tried building one once, but there were too many strange torques involved. I went to the hobby shop and got some stuff. It really needs a professional machine shop to do this. And haven't been able to find that yet. Anyway, this is the pattern, the figure 8 it traces out, which is an important pattern, and I'll be getting back to that. And the revolution is on the X, Y, and Z axes. And again, the heavy side is always flung out in one overall direction. This figure 8 adds up to a centrifugal vector. And, okay, now this is the last third way to induce rotational to linear momentum conversion, or inertial drive. Again, we refer to the fact that the right-handed waves in the ether are tighter and more energetic than the left-handed waves. The north pole of an object has more right-handed energy than the south pole, which has more left-handed energy. We use this to make the atoms themselves into the flywheel I just discussed. You probably know an MRI involves zapping a body or an object and making all the atoms line up so all the north poles of the atoms face in one direction. You do that, and then you start accelerating the atoms, the north pole of the atoms in particular, in this figure 8 pattern, which the flywheel generated. And you turn these atoms into inertial converters themselves. So the very mass that you're dealing with, the very spaceship that you're on, turns into the flywheel itself, the atoms themselves. This not only will overcome gravity, of course you would have to have a computer to fire the magnets in order to make the atom follow the figure 8. It would be a pretty complicated program, but it could be done. And your spaceship would not only overcome gravity, but it would also overcome inertia too. So this is possibly what is used when you see a craft going 1,000 miles an hour and suddenly make a right-handed turn. You think, well, how can the occupants not, be crushed against the hull? The occupants wouldn't even feel the turn because their inertia would be canceled out, as the ship's is, by changing the direction of the firing order of the magnets and directing the center of the 8 to a new vector. So this is UFO technology here. This is another discovery we made we thought was very significant. I'm not schooled enough in mathematics to write this out as it should be in terms of calculus, but it's a fascinating discovery, I think. If you take a hovering spacecraft, say you launch it and you make it hover over Cape Canaveral, it has to accelerate at 32 feet per second in order for it to stay in one place, hovering above the Earth. That's the rate at which gravity accelerates stuff. Now, Newton says an object in orbit is under constant acceleration. Gravity being the device, the implosion of space-time, being the device which keeps this object in orbit. So as the satellite orbits the Earth, it's constantly changing direction. It is under constant acceleration, the same amount of acceleration as this vehicle is hovering over the Earth. Now, it takes about 90 minutes to orbit the Earth, and we did some math that found that during that 90 minutes, this craft, which is hovering, has gained enough acceleration at 32 feet per second to go from 0 to light speed. So we feel this is a very important relationship between pi, one circle, gravity, and the shape of space-time itself. It relates the speed of light, gravity, and pi. Now, I've discussed the 12 different waves that are in this room right now, the idea is, well, knowing about it is swell, but how do we get energy out of these waves? How do we utilize them? How can we achieve over unity or anti-gravity ourselves? Or other technical processes? How do we manage and corral these waves to do what we want them to? By compounding accelerations is the answer. Here we have Newton's circle, an orbit. Something is under constant acceleration. What you do is you figure out how many ways can you accelerate an object at once, in how many different directions can you add these accelerations and make it spin more. The idea is to spin your electrons in as many ways as possible, as fast as possible. So you start off with one orbit here, then you bend the orbit, and then you bend in one side of the orbit, so it goes around, this spirals in, this spirals out, then goes around, spirals in and out. And it's going up and down at the same time. Then you flip that over. The man with the Tesla presentation did a beautiful showcase of this. Then you flip that over and make the old infinity sign, the figure 8. If you also look in math books, you'll notice the right side of the figure 8 is a little smaller than the left side. This is because when you make one side a little smaller and one bigger, you're making the object go in on the right and then out on the left. In on the right, out on the left. That's another acceleration. Then you compound that and make it go in, make it have a left-handed turn and then go out, out, out. This is the clover leaf the Tesla guy held up in front of us the other day. Finally, to add yet more acceleration, you would make it a three-decker, because as it goes down and then back up, which I'll discuss, it changes its position in our gravity field. So it's going through time at one rate here, and it's going through time at a slightly different rate at the bottom of the coil. This, again, adds one more acceleration. You're compounding accelerations. Lastly, you would phase shift the leaves. So the three top leaves are bent downwards. These leaves are designed to catch the innie waves coming in, and then the outie waves are the left, it starts left-handed, catching the outgoing waves, expanding. So now you have something that catches all 12 of these waves in a rotational fashion, and the 13th is gravity going in and out. And again, this has to do with the spiral of phi going in and changing direction and coming out. Really all this is a wound-up spiral. You know, it's twisted and wound up and compounded many times. The final, and the shape of this coil, I call it a tensor coil, does resonate with the shape of the universe. Einstein said our universe is a saddle, and these leaves very much resemble a saddle. Two sides are bent down, then 90 degrees out of phase, those two sides are bent up. And as Einstein says, you know, everything comes back on itself in this universe. Energy goes around, comes out again. Finally, to add the final accelerations, you would use scalar waves or tessellation of the leaves. Just as in nature, when you see a leaf, it has little ripples on it at the outside, and the ripples get bigger and faster as it gets inside. That's what you do to the leaves of these coils here. And it would look something like this. At the outside of the leaf, you have a sine wave, which gets tighter, 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 and then it gets looser, 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 looser. And on top of that, you can add waves inside of the waves. So these waves get faster and faster and faster and faster, and then slow down on the other side. And the process is repeated. This, again, is compounding accelerations and then letting them out, and then compounding it again and letting them out. So what you've added is the 13th compounding of waves, and this will drive any poor electron which travels this circuit in these coils that I had a couple hanging out there. The electrons, it will drive them right out of this continuum because they have gained so much rotation going around this particular path that by the time they're back up at the top, they're spinning so quickly, just like the proton does, they would be forced out of this continuum permanently, and nature doesn't want that to happen. So in order for that not to happen, electrons that are forced into this configuration, especially if it's superconducting, if you can get electrons to really travel the entire route and gain compound spins, the electrons will start radiating EMF in order to stay in this continuum. Because swinging around like that's kind of rude, and they don't like that, and they get very upset and radiate free energy. Again, here's a 3D picture of the Garroway tensor coil. I figure if Marco can have one, I can have one too. This is just the primary discussion here of how it works. The first downward energy comes in, it goes down to the right and then down to the left, and it continues downwards. And that happens 3 times. Then it takes a left-handed turn, and it goes left out, right out, and it comes up. So you have right in, left in, down, right in, left in, down, right in, left in, down, then left out, right out, up, left out, right out, up, and then finally left out, right, up, up, and then it's either fed back into the loop or it disappears from this continuum or it radiates out as light energy, which is probably what happens. We've had some pretty good results with these coils. As far as field effects, I have a couple of coils up here that if you'd like to come up during the show or afterwards and dangle them close to objects, they're made out of tin and lead, they're non-ferrous material, and they do produce a slight field effect. You can feel things like wood especially is very reactive. You can hold it near wood and you can feel it being repulsed or repelled. And we feel these field effects are not magnetic in nature. These are the actual ether waves interfering with the tensor envelopes that I discussed that surround everything. So there's probably a lot of industrial application with that sort of thing too. People call them dowsing rods. I've had somebody call it the invisible dog leash, because if you walk with it over the ground, you can feel it tugging a little bit, as though there's something under there pulling on it. It feels kind of magnetic, but not quite. It tends to twist also. Instead of just push and pull, it does tend to twist a little bit. Let's see here. Now here's your Superluminal Accelerator. This is your average time machine. It's designed to get to Alpha Centauri in 10 seconds rather than 4 years. The way this works is very much like the anti-gravity machine. On the nuclear magnetic resonance level, what you do is accelerate your atoms in the same pattern I just showed you that the Tensor Coil accelerates them in, only you do it on the nuclear level using magnets and a half a sphere, and you would fire the magnets in this order: right, 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 and then 90 degrees out of phase, and left, left, left. At the same time, other magnets are pushing the atoms down, then up, then down, then up. So just like the Tensor Coil, you've added 12 plus 1 rotations, and you have 13 new rotations to your atoms, which will push the atoms right out of this continuum. And as far as navigation, we don't think we have that down yet, but it has to do with the original position of the atoms when they begin acceleration. And we feel this will produce superluminal acceleration not only for communication purposes. Not only could you build a transmitter that would transmit faster than light, we feel if you did it right, this would actually take your spacecraft out of our continuum through hyperspace, and you would reappear elsewhere and elsewhere. The idea is to slip into another continuum just for a second until the ether in this continuum moves, and then reappear in the same place, but it would be a far different place because the ether is moved while you were standing still somewhere else. Anyway, that's enough to give you a headache. One more interesting discovery we made is that, have you ever taken a shower and looked down and seen the little spokes that are in the spiral of the water going down the drain? Sometimes you'll see little spokes radiating out. And you can even splash the spiral, and the spokes come back in the same place. I've always wondered about that, and then realized that there's actually a phi acceleration occurring within the phi acceleration. So there's accelerations within the spiral itself of time-space as it implodes. And this is what I was talking about, the twist of time-space as well as the linear acceleration. Now this is a way to keep track of the phase shifting of the twist. The twist is 72 degrees of rotation per second. When the wheel flips to the other side, it is seen going the other way. And like I said, a right-handed circle has 360 degrees of rotation, and a left-handed circle requires 396 degrees of rotation energy-wise. You won't see that on the markings of a compass, but it takes a little more energy to go around a right-handed circle than it does a left. So we have two patterns that are generated, one for 360 and one for 396. Anyway, to keep track of the phase shifting that occurs when the ether is speeding up and when it's bunching up into that spiral and when it speeds up again, you get a 5-sided pentagram, and you go a la the Fibonacci series. The first side goes 72 degrees in 1 second, then it goes 72 degrees the next second, then twice 72 degrees the third, then 3 times, 3 spaces, and now the wheel has flipped over and you see the wheel going counterclockwise because it's completed its 360 degrees, or 396, whichever case it might be. If you start the wheel right-handed, like I said, it's 360. If you start it left-handed, it's 396. This math is all getting a little ugly, so I'll just give you the sequence, the number patterns. We call them fractal number patterns, which the sequence generates. And these are the patterns. We've had some really incredible results using magnetic windings and these number sequences. These all represent degrees of 72 degrees of rotation, and they're per second. So if you even take a mirror and sand it, right, 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 left, right, 5 times left, 1 per second, and then 6 times to the right, 72 degrees, 1 per second, then 12 times to the left, 1 per second, 72 degrees. Or you can make these entire circles or spirals or any increments really. And then finally 1, and then repeat the sequence again, starting left-handed this time. This would be for right-handed energy here. This is for right-handed in energy, backwards for right-handed out energy. What it does is you start resonating with a particular type of spiraling wave. I said there were 4 types, and this is the combination for right types, and this is the combination for left types. And what you do when you start resonating with these types of spirals is you start grabbing a little energy from them and turning it into heat and other things. I was so pleased to hear Vernon the other day talk about the creation of synergistic matter. I was almost chicken to even bring that up at this convention because I thought, oh, I don't want to be thought crazy. Well, Vernon can do it, and I told him the other day, I've done the same thing, not quite on the same level as you have, but using windings in these patterns, magnetic windings, I've actually seen, we call it Dopplering, matter Doppler itself. From small amounts of crushed up carbon, other little tiny bits, trace amounts of carbon would appear around it out of nothing. And the weird thing is, Vernon said that when he did it, he had his synergistic matter analyzed, and it was the same as the original minerals in the experiment. Our stuff came out a little bit tweaked. It was sort of like a Xerox copy that didn't quite work completely, much like the gentleman before me saying his goal was a little bit off. It wasn't quite, maybe electrons didn't duplicate or Doppler correctly, but our matter came out kind of fractated. It was rough-edged and had little valleys and cracks in it, and the weight of it was a little different. It was a little bit lighter than it should be, and it seemed to have a different center of gravity, stuff like that. I never had it analyzed. I wish I could get it analyzed, do some serious experiments and get that analyzed. But what happened was based on the same thing, the same process that Vernon described as the ether gets concentrated and it bunches up around matter and it's got nowhere else to go, so it kind of falls off into matter next to it. It's like an echo of the original matter occurs and new matter appears out of, quote, nothing. There's no such thing as nothing, folks. Everything's made out of something, the ether, what have you. Now we move on to another etherical effect, which has puzzled scientists of late very much. The dark matter that you hear so much about. What, 73% of the matter in the universe is dark matter, they tell us? I doubt it. But you can't find it. I mean, you can't go down to the store and buy a container of dark matter. They've never detected dark matter, but yet they say that because of the gravitational effect seen, that 73% of the matter in the universe is dark matter. What dark matter really is an effect of 2 photons passing each other. Like strangers in the night, when they approach each other, they look at each other gravitationally, and they bend a little bit. They affect each other's trajectory. However, according to Newton, whenever something bends or changes direction, it is under constant acceleration, and nature doesn't like that. So in order to prevent this paradox of happening, a photon going faster than light, when the photons bend, space-time itself stretches just a little bit to accommodate the change in direction, so they don't have to actually violate the light speed law. But when they fly apart and they go on their merry way, space-time snaps back together at the point where they passed each other. As it does so, a tiny little ripple is created. A gravity wave expands outwards. This is what dark matter really is. It's an effect. It's not matter at all. It's a gravitational effect that occurs, and they've seen that dark matter is concentrated. It seems to be in halos around galaxies where the most light is, where light from one side of the galaxy is going to interfere with the other side of the galaxy. So that's what we think dark matter is. It's an etherical effect. And we also have dark energy on the table here. This is something they've been talking about for the last few years, because they've noted that when they look to the galaxies at the edge of our universe, the redshift increases ever more, as though these galaxies were flying away from us faster and faster. And again, like Michelson and Morley, they jumped on the first possible combination of explanations, and they came up with this theory that, oh, there's this magic energy out there that's pushing things faster and faster away from us. But that's the opposite of gravity. So how can that be? How can you have both gravity and anti-gravity in the same, ball of wax here? It's because dark energy is another illusion. We are shrinking faster at this point of our universe's compression than the galaxies at the edge of our universe are shrinking 14 billion years ago. As the universe implodes, it implodes at a constantly accelerating rate. So we here are experiencing more gravity and we're shrinking faster than those old galaxies at the edge of the universe. Thus the difference in light speed and redshift. So it's like if everybody in this room shrunk down to 2 inches tall and looked across and looked at their neighbor, you'd be able to say, hey, wow, whoa. You'd be able to say, whoa, you seem to be further, oh, it's this one. Wrong instrument, Dave. Hey, you seem to be further away. And then you'd say, well, that's the illusion, I'm actually closer. If we all shrunk down to 2 inches tall, we'd all look further away. Even if we were, say, half the distance we originally were, we would still look further away from each other. And that's what's occurring in our universe right now, is we're shrinking and we're appearing to be further apart, but there is no dark energy out there responsible. All this effect is produced by gravity itself, imploding us and stretching out time-space between us as it does so. So no dark energy. This is just to say that the energy and the space and the gravity that's going to be in this room is already 1 light year away. It's imploding in on us, and it will be here in 1 light year. This is using Andromeda as an example. The energy that will be in our Milky Way is already halfway to Andromeda, but it's just starting to fall into us, and it will be in our Milky Way in 200 million years because it travels at the speed of light. The speed of light is actually 186,000 miles an hour per second per second. Light itself accelerates at a constantly accelerating rate, but it looks like a flat linear speed to us because light speed acceleration is time itself. Time is caused by the implosion of space. It is the movement of space which allows time to occur. So we experience a linear timeline, but what's really happening, if you were outside our universe, you would see it shrinking faster and faster and faster, and you would see a light beam go faster and faster and faster, a la the Fibonacci series. But fortunately, our clocks run on a linear scale due to this wonderful constant acceleration. If things weren't constantly accelerating inwards, where does all the energy that causes gravity and where does all the energy that moves light around come from? It is this constant acceleration of space that produces this illusion of time. And we move on to dimensional aspects of things, which I think science grossly, anyway, science overlooks it. This is about other dimensions that every particle has to have in order to exist. A dimension is a misused word often. It's actually just a quality something has to have in order for it to exist. Everything not only has length, width, and breadth, but also clockwise or counterclockwise rotation on the X, Y, and Z axes. So everything has a North Pole, and if you look down at the North Pole, is it rotating clockwise? Is it rotating counterclockwise? The direction of the rotation affects the way the particle will react with the local ether field, or how quickly it's moving through time. Really, nothing moves through time. Time moves through everything. But it moves through everything depending on its rotational configuration. So you have to take into account that everything is always moving. There is no such thing as stillness. So first of all, it's moving positive or negative on the X, Y, and Z axis. Those are 3 dimensions. Then, that are really unaccounted for often, we look at it and we say, oh, it's standing still. No, everything has to be moving on all these axes all the time. Then it has to have 3 different spins going on all the time. And finally, you have to multiply these 3 or 6 factors twice because the observer himself has to have all these qualities. In classical physics, the observer is above it all. The observer has no gravity, has no length, width, or breadth, or rotation going on, when in reality, everything has these qualities. So you have to take in these extra dimensions of existence in order to find out exactly where your electron is and where it's going to be in the next second or 2. Finally, this is sort of what Marco was talking about last night as the number 9. It's the t-axis. It's the middle of that figure-8 spiral that he was referring to that radiates light energy. The t-axis is the amount of time from the observer to the object being observed by the speed of light. Everything has rotation to it, as I just discussed. If there's a grid in the corner of the room and a particle is at 5 on the x, 5 on the z, and 5 on the y, that's great. But once you take into consideration the spin of that particle, then you know it's gravity. And if you add spin to that particle, what are you doing? You're adding energy to that particle. And energy is equal to mass, according to Einstein. It may not appear to be mass, but it's equal to it. So as you spin the particle faster, you're adding energy. It's causing the particle to become more massive and therefore have more gravity. And as that particle gains more gravity, it starts to sink into its own gravity well. It becomes further away from you in time, not space, because it's still at the same coordinates on the spatial sense, but it becomes further away from you, and it would take a light beam more time to get to that particle. So this is the t-axis. This is something I think has not really been explored in conventional physics and needs to be. You can't know where something is unless you know what its spin is, and once you know what its spin is and what your spin is, then you can figure out how far away from it is how far away from you it is, all out the speed of light. And this is important as far as tracking radio waves, even particles, nuclear. This is basically all nuclear physics stuff. However, this is more along the lines of what we do on everyday baseball fields. And Squirrely told us that pi is a constant of nature. It's this number right here, blah, 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 blah. And they tell you how to calculate it using triangles and everything like that. It's too bad they lied. No, I don't think they realize that pi is actually a flux function, and it varies according to the gravitational field you're in. I recently saw a TV show where a mathematician discussed the Greenwald theorem, which proves that Pythagoras was not correct. A squared plus b squared is greater than c squared when you map it on a sphere. She actually did a demonstration where she took a sphere and some string and she mapped out some areas. How much time? 15? Oh, 11? Wow, okay. Anyway, Pythagoras is a little off. Pi increases as the circle bends, because as the circle bends in 2 dimensions, not 1. So the circle bends a lot and the radius bends a little as the field increases. So pi is a flux function according to gravity. 0 ain't nothing. They told you 0 is just a placeholder. Well, most of them are. These zeros are placeholders. This 0 here is actually a probability envelope, a statement saying we looked as close as possible and absolutely nothing is there. On the real world, we know that there's always going to be a trace amount of something real being measured. Space, time, gravity, etc. is going to be there, but we can't measure it because our instruments can't see it. Our eyes can't see it. So the average value of 0 is going to be this number, 147, with 5 zeros in front of it to the nearest 1/10. So this number here is actually equal to this number here on the average, plus or minus if you're dealing with energy. But this is a very interesting number. The average amount of stuff that is unobserved. The math gets really ugly. It has to do with the bell curve of distribution. I don't have time to go into it now. Here's a few more formulas we came up with. If you take light speed and convert it into feet per second and multiply it times gravity, it comes out to be this number, pi to the 10th to the 13th. It is pi, but it's removed 13 decimal points. We don't understand why, but we think this is much more than a coincidence. It has something to do with the grand unified field theory. Furthermore, E equals mc to phi squared. It's not E equals mc squared because you have to take into consideration the spin of the particles. Einstein said when they fly apart, it's c squared. Well, they fly apart, but they're spinning also. So you don't see many exponents with decimal points, but this is one. It would be c times c plus c times point c, 0.6c times c times 0.01c, etc. So E equals mc to phi squared. All numbers are fractal in nature. We have to adjust our numbering system to the true nature of reality in order to get better results. Our system has to mimic the way nature is. So in your calculations, make 1 into 1, 1, 1, 1, an irrational number, goes on forever. All the numbers are fractals. 12 is 12.12, 12, 12. This number would be 19.5, which is E. It's 19.5, 195, 195, 195. So if you fractate all your numbers and your constants and then do your calculations and then defract them, another way of fracking them is multiply everything times 1.111, you'll find the results of your equations and calculations much more accurate and much more in tune with the way things really are. Why does the universe resonate in 7? Because it does a little dance. As the energy comes in, it sort of does a 4-step, 3-step dance. 4 steps forward, then 3 back. Then 4 steps forward, then 3 back. This is what we perceive as one moment. It's actually 7 movements altogether. There are 600 billion of these movements per second to make stuff happen the way they are. This is about the last one. Quantum entanglement is really a matter of the photons flying apart. They're both riding the same waves. As they fly apart, they're both riding right-handed waves. A light and right rhyme for a reason, I believe. I think they've known that right-handed waves carry light much better than the other ones, just as left-handed waves carry gravity. We think that the left-handed out waves and the right-handed in waves tend to work more on the nuclear level, being responsible for magnetism and the weak force and the strong force. Different waves have different personalities and characteristics and cater and shuffle around different energies. So this really needs to be looked into a great deal. And that's basically it. I have a couple of demos up here. Let's see if I've sanded this symbol in a very particular way with those patterns I showed you. See if we can get any effect here on this table. And the idea is to wait till it stops spinning and see if we can see anything on the monitor here. Takes a minute. Whoa. Stay, boy, stay. Oh. John fixed this up too well. Well, look at the center. I don't want to prime you or give you any suggestions. I just want you to look at the center when it stops and see if you see anything unusual. The camera angle isn't so hot. I'll tell you what's supposed to happen if you don't see anything. You probably won't because it's not really set up the way it should be. I sanded the surface in those patterns I showed you earlier, and it's designed to attract the ether energy and capture a little bit of it. Needs a break. Yeah, huh? Spins pretty good. Well, as you see, it soaks up a lot of energy. Okay. Gee, in the meantime, if anybody would like to come up and dangle one of these things, you might be able to feel a field effect if anybody's interested in trying here. Let's see, this one is the best one right here. Dangle it on the end of your finger, sort of like this. Here, I'll show you.
Okay.
Like this.
Yeah.
And then hold it near stuff, like, you know, take it near over here, and then over the floor is the best, like, you know, here. Kind of move it around a little. And, yeah. And here, you can try this one. All right, let's see if we see anything here. Up. Well, you'll see. Hopefully. Finally, here we go. All right, you see it. This is because, I believe, this is because the atoms have actually soaked up due to the sanding, which I did by hand. I've rotated the atoms and imparted more wobble to them, and they soak up the ether a little better than most atoms. And as they are rotated, they soak up a little extra ether, a little extra space-time, and then they give it back to you once it stops rotating. It radiates out ether energy. And that's what you've just seen. Well, yeah, it looks like it's backing up. It's physically not, you physically can't reverse directions according to common science. And if you look closely, you'll notice that the inside backs up more than the outside. The middle what? The middle backs up more than the outside does. No, it's not. It's all one piece. It just looks like the middle is backing up because that's soaked up more juice. The juices flowed into it from the outside of the symbol. It condenses. Everything is an inward function as far as energy goes. And here, try this one. Sometimes if you dangle it with this wire here, you can get a slight field effect. And I'm sorry I didn't bring more. I actually brought a couple more, but they got crushed.
So, I mean, what's the effect? What do you...
You're looking for a slight field effect. Like, see how it's bobbing? It starts to wobble and bob up and down. You basically...
You get toward the ground?
Yeah, if you hold it near objects like this table or... I wish I had some wood. Wood is the most reactive because wood is organic and it has a lot of right-handed DNA and a lot of right-handed energy. And it tends to be the most reactive substance.
Really?
Yeah, wood, of all things.
This is wood.
Well, you know, I was talking to the water treatment guy, and I think this would be a great, if you made a piping system in this manner, I think it would accelerate the water molecules and add rotation to them. And you would soak, just like the symbol, the molecules would soak up a little of ether energy, and it would jive you up, just like his structured water does.
So you would make it out of that, what's that material?
Well, this is solder. This is this is tin and lead. It's all non-ferrous material.
You say we're supposed
So-
to be able to
Quantum
feel
physics
something?
now tells us that our conscious mind affects this stuff.
Oh, yeah, it
Up,
does.
down?
So is it the mind, is it the collective mind, the mind that's altering this, or is it your,
That's a really good question.
If it weighs half a
Oh,
pound,
okay.
just feel half
Yeah,
a
I mean,
pound
I still got 9 minutes.
Would that weight vary,
Get a minute.
or should it increase?
Okay. 147. Okay, cool. Where's my mic? Oh, okay. Where's the, where did I put that mouse? Oh, here it is. Put your glasses back on for a closing shot of the Tensor Coils if you want to see them. And here, you can spin it again if you want. It's different when you spin it left-handed. It's a slightly different effect. If you want to try that again, and I'll show you these coils one last time here. John, can I get my presentation again? There's like 3 more coils at the very end. Okay. So it's right after the closing screen. I got like 3 more 3D pictures. Yeah, okay. No. The closing screen? Okay, we'll run through it all again. Okay, here's some last 3D pictures just for your entertainment. This is the Tensor Coil again here. Yeah, this is basically it. So I'll go back and wrap it up. All right, well, that's Implosion Vortex Dynamics. I'm Dave Garroway, and I'm looking for people to collaborate with. If you're a physicist or a mathematician, please contact me. And of course, me and my buddy and folks like Marco and people in the Ether project are looking for financial backing so we can do some serious laboratory studies and so we can actually develop and utilize this important vortex technology for the benefit and the good of future mankind. This is my email, this is my phone number, and thank you very much for your patience. It's been a pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dave Garroway. Okay, we're going to try to pick up a little bit of time. We're going to take instead of a 10-minute break, we're only going to take an 8-minute break. And we're going to ask everybody in the last 10 minutes